Welcome to Pass the Torch of Liberty, Lesson 3, Faith Requires Freedom. In previous lessons, we described the first two pillars of American liberty. First, that freedom requires virtue. Only virtuous citizens can be self-governing. And second, that virtue requires religion. True religion results in virtuous behavior. Today, we examine the third pillar, faith requires freedom. The French historian Alexis de Tocqueville wrote, "The character of Anglo-American civilization is the product of two perfectly distinct elements that elsewhere have often made war with each other, but which in America they have succeeded in incorporating somehow into one another and combining marvelously. I mean to speak of the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom." Tocqueville marveled at the balance between faith and freedom that he saw in the United States. That sounds very strange to many people today. Eric Metaxas has noted, that's because in America today we have stepped backward to a cultural situation less like the earlier times in our own country than like the France of de Tocqueville's day, in which religion and freedom were thought to be bitterest enemies. The key difference between France and America was religious liberty. Since the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, religious liberty and tolerance have been at the core of American life. Faith flourishes in freedom. Because faith is not forced, America has been one of the most religious countries in the world. Freedom of religious belief was a new idea resulting from the religious persecution that many settlers had experienced in Europe. The radical nature of the idea was stated by Roger Williams, the Baptist founder of Rhode Island, when he wrote that soul freedom, or freedom of conscience, meant a permission of the most paganish, Jewish, Turkish, or anti-Christian consciences and worships to be granted to all men in all nations and countries. Freedom of religion is guaranteed by the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The first clause prohibits the government from establishing a state-sponsored church, as was common in Europe. The second clause safeguards one's freedom to believe and practice one's religious faith as a matter of right, without coercion or obstruction from the government. Religious freedom is perhaps the greatest achievement of the American founding. It separated politics from theology. A religious denomination could not use the power of the state, and on the flip side, the state could not dictate matters of theology. As a gift of the Creator, religious liberty cannot be taken by the government. The First Amendment permitted the flourishing of a moral consensus instead of sectarian strife. Religious freedom creates a greater opportunity for man to achieve his highest end, to worship and serve his Creator. The founders grounded our rights in a transcendent idea, the laws of nature and nature's God. Rights are an endowment of the Creator, not of government. Religious liberty enables believers to freely assemble and wholeheartedly worship. It encourages true religion, that is, religion of the heart, that results in good behavior. America is a demonstration of the fact that religious liberty enables human flourishing, because it encourages the development not only of the mind and the body, but the nourishing of the human soul. Eric Metaxas writes that the Reverend George Whitefield and the religious revival that he initiated, the Great Awakening, was a critical factor in preparing America for both the Revolutionary War and for the self-governance initiated with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It was this movement that elevated the common man, the lower classes of society, to believe that they had significance simply because God the Creator loved them. The gospel of Christ was the most powerful sociological leveler in history, and although the message had existed for 17 centuries, it would burst into full bloom only now at this crucial point in history under the watering can of Whitefield's preaching. And over the decades, this changed the colonies and created an American people. It was the gospel message that led to the concept that every man was equal under the law, because Whitefield preached that every man was equal in the sight of God. By the time Whitefield died in 1770, An inconceivable 80% of the population of the American colonies had heard him preach at least once. In his lifetime, he preached over 18,000 sermons and 12,000 talks and exhortations. John Piper says that by 1750, virtually every American loved and admired Whitefield and saw him as their champion. George Whitefield has been called the spiritual founding father of the United States, and that seems to be a very good title indeed. Historian Paul Johnson wrote, "The American religious groups were judged not by their theology, but by the behavior of their adherents. Thus, the very diversity of the sects constituted the national religious strength, since all operated within a broad common code of morals, and their competition for souls mirrored the competition of firms for business in the market economy. In both cases, the role of the state was to hold the ring and make that competition fair." That is what religious liberty was and is. The government essentially said, yes, be religious. We will not only tolerate it, we will respect it, and we will encourage it. But we cannot take sides or put our thumbs on the scales. But the understanding of this has been lost to many in modern America. That was the genius of the fathers, to separate church and state in such a way that they were each sacrosanct. What about the separation of church and state? In 1802, President Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association. "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." Jefferson was explaining why he, as president, was opposed to proclaiming national days of public fasting and thanksgiving. State governments were free to do this. In fact, 6 states had established state churches. But, Jefferson argued, the federal government should not interfere or take sides in declaring religious holidays. Jefferson clearly did not intend to remove religious expression from the public square. He regularly attended church services in the House of Representatives and allowed his executive offices to be used for the same purpose. The founders saw nothing wrong with the federal government indirectly supporting religion in a non-discriminatory and non-coercive way. However, the Supreme Court in 1947 reinterpreted the phrase separation of church and state to create a legal barrier, removing religion from public life. The founders' intention was clearly the opposite. They considered the practice of religion to be essential to civil government. Prayer and religious services were common in public ceremonies and in Congress prior to the Supreme Court decision in 1947, and they were considered to be simply examples of the free exercise of religion. The Constitution protects the free exercise of religion. It emphatically does not prohibit it. As Matthew Spaulding explains, the Constitution officially separates church and state at the level of doctrine and lawmaking. It also allows the general non-sectarian encouragement and support of religion in public laws, in official speeches and ceremonies, on public property, and in public buildings, and even in public schools. Such activities were understood to be part of the free exercise of religion. In limiting the free exercise of religion in the public square and in public schools, the Supreme Court, in effect, put its thumb on the scales in favor of the atheists. While it may seem an imposing task in a pluralistic society, America needs to recover the earlier balance between the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom that de Tocqueville observed. Can we permit open discussion of religious ideas and the free exercise of religion for people of all faiths in the public square and in public schools, for Christians, for Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and atheists, without hostility, without intimidation or coercion? The principle of religious liberty was a great advance in the history of nations. It freed political life from religious conflict, and it freed theology from the temptations of worldly power. It recognized both reason and revelation without subordinating them to political authority. It secured religious freedom in a transcendent foundation beyond the reach of government, the laws of nature and nature's God. The government cannot take it away because it is not granted by the government. It established common standards of right and wrong in the common teachings of religion. It encouraged citizens to serve their highest calling, to worship and serve their God. In the next lesson, we will talk about American heroes and why venerating genuine heroes is an essential component of patriotism. Please refer to our website for discussion materials and additional reading on this topic.